it was like you just got to suspend that,
right?
Because it wasn't embarrassing, but definitely their choreography was a little toned down. They weren't doing gymnastics, and
it certainly helps if they guys haven't let themselves go. Like you said, Bobby Brown, when you had seen him before, he wasn't capable of doing the same kind of things. You don't want to
sitting down for a song or two, like catching his breath. I mean, physically, his physique didn't look necessarily bad, but it looked better this time. Like
right,
bothered to work out, I guess. But no, the new kids, they all looked fine, but it was the choreography was a little primitive, and sometimes they weren't all in on it. Like somebody would just like
take a little time off,
take a break, take a powder in the middle of a song. But mostly there was a lot. It was a lot of visuals. Salt and Pepper, I think, was by far the highlight for me. And
right.
They only got 4 or 5 songs maybe, and then Naughty by Nature only got 3 songs. They were really good. That was that. They were like, to me, like when we were talking about that breaking point between the pop stuff and the more legitimate, sort of streetwise hip hop. They sort of bridged that. It was real. The lyrics were talking about what they talk about, life in the street and yada yada. But there was enough melody and groove that you followed. So I enjoyed them. It was the first time I'd seen them, and would have liked to have heard more of them. And then, so definitely the kids were the big one, the one everyone came to see. But I could have used a little more. Like Tiffany and Debbie Gibson were fine. Yeah, they were fine.
They did what they did. Did it seem an odd? I mean, it is a mixtape. That was the genesis of the tour. So you're going to get different things, but it almost seems like they'd be better off in another mixtape tour with 3 or 4 other acts that were. Was it jarring at all? Or
no, I thought that made it perfect because it just reminded you of that whole era.
Right,
they were part of that era. They weren't necessarily part of those. Maybe they weren't on the same
genre. Yeah,
the same radio program or charts. But I mean, Debbie Gibson she played piano on a couple songs. Did a ballad duet with one of the new kids, and it was and. There were little girls singing. What was her big hit? I can't even think of it right now. But that song.
Mom played it for him.
So. It was.
Well, it's somewhat. Also, we see this a lot more in country music. Is the multiple act type of concerts where there'll be 5, 6 acts, and this sort of harkens back to the days of rock and roll in the 50s when they'd be 7 and 8 acts that would go out there, play 4 songs a piece, and that was it. Like if you watch the Buddy Holly story or whatever. So it's not like unique. It's different than the opener, big show type of act. How do you think it works generally for shows? I mean, multiple.
Well, I thought this worked
multiple acts
because the new kids opened. They started with like 4 songs, so everybody was there, and I got the word out as much as I could. Like, don't sleep on this because you'll miss 5 of their songs if you're so that got everybody in there, and I thought it worked well. I didn't think it was jarring or weird or like this doesn't belong here, and they did the same show every night. They switched out a couple songs here and there, but and then they ended with this one where everybody was on stage.
Right,
it was a song that was basically about that era.
Right.
Kind of like I said, it was like a musical selfie. Like, hey, look at us. This is what we did, and people liked us. And but it worked. It was a good way to end the show, and everybody was on stage. I thought it was. I mean, you walk out of there going, that was a lot of fun. Nothing wrong with that show. It was good, and people danced and sang, and
that's the point.
Happy, right?
That's the point. I wonder what it would be like. You mentioned Naughty by Nature to be on a tour, and I don't know what they're getting paid, but I'm sure it's a nice check. What would it be like to do 3 songs and get? Sounds like easy. When I was reading the thing, I'm like, well, that sounds like pretty easy work.
I think Tiffany did 2, maybe, or like 1 full one, and then a medley of 2. So she had and then everybody was on stage for the last one. But I don't know, nice paycheck. I mean, the new kids did most of the heavy lifting for sure, and probably got.
And did they have an ancillary stage so that things moved?
They did, There was
quickly.
Yes. So there was no lag or lull between sets.
Sort of like
there was no
arena version of watching Jules Holland or something.
Right. Well, there was no band, obvious, so it wasn't like they had to
Right.
It was all piped in out of nowhere.
I don't know. It came.
Some of the vocals were too, but so what?
It came from nowhere. When you see this in country music, they do this quite a bit too for a long show. What would you consider too long? I mean, when you go to like Arrowhead or something like that.
You mean the entire show, or like
like if somebody's going to play 5 hours or something? Yeah, I mean the entire show, not one person. But
well, those Kenny Chesney shows usually start at 5. There's 3 opening acts, and they don't get over till 11:30.
Right.
And it's usually in the middle of July, and it's really hot, and there is time between sets, although it's not really long. It's
right.
They've got it down to a military science, like
right.
What they're doing. So, but still, I mean, there are people who go out to those, and as soon as the gates open, they're out there tailgating.
Right.
And then when the gates open to the stadium, they're in there drinking, and like it's definitely some people don't pace themselves, and it can be like a Chiefs game.
Right.
And yeah, those days are, at least for me, standing for 6 or 7 hours is exhausting.
So do you find that in your experience, people will just show up for just the Kenny Chesney part and not do the all-day deal?
Absolutely. I guess it depends on who's opening for him, because he's had, and some of his openers, or the person who performs right before him.
Right.
It's like Jason Aldean, Tim McGraw, Miranda Lambert. So they're headliners.
But not co-headliners.
But no, right. No, you don't want to. I made the mistake of referring to, I think, Jason Aldean as his co-headliner, and got this sort of cease and desist email from his tour. Like, no, he is not a headliner or a co-headliner. He's just part of the opening.
You know, I wonder sometimes, that's interesting, whether the artist would feel like he was in favor of that particular, Tim McGraw strikes me as a fairly down-to-earth guy, and his people probably want to protect his brand and all that. I get that, but I wonder if he knew that you got an email, whether he'd be in favor of that.
He probably didn't know. I mean, that's all stipulated in these contracts. I know it's laid out clearly who is who, and I know that Tim McGraw on his own couldn't draw 56,000 people to Arrowhead.
Right.
So it's Chesney's the pull. So he has the last word, and I get it. But it just seemed to me like, well, there were a large percentage of the crowd was there to see the openers as much as they were to see Chesney.
Right.
So anyway, but yeah, he has 3 or 4 acts that open before him, and they dribble in. Either they're arriving late or they're out in the parking lot drinking cheaper beer and waiting.
Than what they can get inside, right? I did something. We didn't do something while I was on vacation in Europe. Just leads to one more question before our first segment ends, and that is when we mapped the trip out. Well, along the way, after we mapped the trip out, we mapped it out a long time ago, change in business situation for me, which you could explain 2 weeks in Europe right now in my position. But anyway. So when the Mark Knopfler tour was announced, there was a date in Toulouse, France, and it was in Toulouse, France was near where we were going to be at that time. And we thought, wow, that would be so cool, but we're going to do that. We decided not to. It was about 90 minutes away to Toulouse from where we were. In the middle of your vacation, do you really want to pack up and go there, maybe spend the night in someplace else? So we decided not to do it. So because we're going to go see him in Kansas City in August. Have you seen much music out of this country?
No.
Right.
No, not at all.
Because this would have been, I'm sure you would have played, all the music would have been in English before a French audience, and people in that area of France generally, almost everybody is usually capable of speaking some English. It's just the way Europe is, but it's one of the areas where there'd be less English spoken. He probably says a few things in French or whatever, but you've never experienced that type of thing, like seeing a band in Germany or something like that?
No, the only time I've been overseas, it was to Portugal for 10 days back in 1990. And just personal sidebar, the day before we were leaving, my wife confirmed that she was pregnant with our first child. So, right. She couldn't drink, or the smell of fish made her ill. But We pioneered on. I did go to a bar, a Rolling Stones bar, and there was a great Rolling Stones cover band there.
Neat.
So that was my...
That was your European musical experience.
I've seen shows in Canada, but no. That would probably be a different experience.
You know what's interesting? Just to, hey, I get my cursory Mark Knopfler reference in. He just announced a show on this tour that he's going to play Madison Square Garden this year, but he's going to do it with Bonnie Raitt. And I think it's just another indication of the fact that, and generally he's played all concert venues about the size of the Midland or so since he became a pure solo artist. This is a pretty big step, I would think. He still sells out arena-sized things in Europe. But it just shows two basically 70-year-old musicians think they can sell out Madison Square Garden or at least draw a great show. And I think it just shows the longevity, and these musical people have staying power. And if they keep their chops and stay in good shape, they can still do things like that.
Well, it's like it was James Taylor and Carole King came here, and that drew a really good crowd. He was supposed to come with Bonnie Raitt last year, I think. She got sick and needed some surgery, so she was not part of that. But he always draws. I mean, he always sells out Starlight, so that's 7,000 or 8,000 people.
Right.
He will always do that because you go to those shows, and there are kids in their 20s and 30s who know his music because their parents pass it down.
Right.
I mean, I think we've talked about this before, and it's just the truth. Like, who's doing that music now that it's going to be out there 50 years from now, 40 years from now, and their children are going to be going with them? And I don't really know that there is anybody.
Yeah, and I don't think, I think maybe if some people, I don't even think these are like get off my lawn type comments. I think they're realistic to think of what type of acts that we have now that will be playing arenas or mid-sized venues when they're 65 years old.
But to be fair,
there are people who are getting there and doing it. Yeah.
Also, there are way more bands and acts out there now, so the music audience worldwide is just so balkanized, so fragmented that it's just hard for one band like to be that one band. Like when Peter Frampton put out "Comes Alive," well, who else was there out there? I mean,
everybody had the album, or the Eagles when they were at their peak. They just dominate for a while, and then
Fleetwood Mac,
and then you have millions and millions of fans who aren't going to go away,
right? But there weren't 30,000 records coming out every year back then like there are now. So the competition and the noise and the traffic is so much heavier right now.
So harder to become that thing for that long.
Right.
Maybe you can be, Bruno Mars for 3 years or something like. But can you be Bruno Mars for? Now he's maybe somebody who might fit into that category, who might have that staying power because he will reinvent himself and whatever.
I don't know about stadiums, but you know what? He probably could have put 30,000 people into Arrowhead the last time he came because he sold out the Sprint Center so fast. They could have doubled that, and that would have been 36,000.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. Tim Finn's joining us. He's in Kansas City Magazine. You can read his not only informative but very well written. It's real literature, folks.
I try.
And you can find him at In Kansas City Magazine, and every Thursday at 4 o'clock with John Hart on 90.9 The Bridge as well. We'll talk about some of his can't-miss concerts in this. A real interesting list this time around. There always is, but I don't usually just tick it off like, there's a lazy way to do a segment. Just read Tim's top 5. But in this case, maybe it's warranted. Coming up next.
More of Danny's Reasonably Irreverent podcast after this.
Before you spend your time and money going after an MBA, ask yourself why. Is it so you can tell people you got your MBA? So you can add a line to your CV? So you can call it a CV instead of a resume? Truth is, any MBA will do that. On the other hand, if your goal is to learn how to successfully manage and grow a business with real-world insights from experienced professionals, well, consider getting your MBA from Park University. Our low student-to-teacher ratio gives you personalized attention, and our face-to-face and online classes offered in 8-week terms are designed with working professionals like you in mind. No wonder the Kansas City Business Journal ranks Park University as the top MBA program in the area. Classes begin June 10th at all 4 KC area locations: Parkville,